The Founding Fathers of Democracy. Stories of America's first presidents. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the world is still and your mind yearns for peace, let me tell you about the extraordinary, ordinary men who dared to build a nation from nothing but hope and determination. These are not tales of superhuman heroes, but of flawed, brilliant, and deeply human individuals who shaped the very foundations of the country we know today. George Washington, the reluctant crown picture, if you will. A winter morning in 1732 when snowflakes danced across the Virginia countryside. In a modest farmhouse, a child drew his first breath, unaware that destiny had already begun weaving his story into the fabric of a nation yet to be born. This child was George Washington, and his journey would take him from the quiet tobacco fields of his youth to the thunderous battlefields of the Revolution. Washington's early years were marked not by privilege, but by loss. When his father died, leaving 11-year-old George with limited formal education, the boy turned to the wilderness itself as his teacher. He learned to read the land, navigate by the stars, and understand that authentic leadership comes not from commanding others, but from commanding oneself. The young surveyor who once mapped the Virginia frontier could never have imagined that he would one day map the course of human liberty. But when duty called, Washington answered, not with eagerness, but with the quiet resolve of a man who understood that some burdens are too significant to refuse. Through 8 long years of war, Washington held together an army that existed more in spirit than in substance. At Valley Forge, when his soldiers left bloody footprints in the snow, he could have abandoned the cause. Instead, he chose to share their suffering, believe in their dreams, and prove that leadership is not about avoiding hardship, but about transforming it into a source of hope. And when victory finally came, when the most powerful empire on earth lay defeated, Washington made perhaps the most extraordinary decision in human history. He walked away from power. He could have been king, but instead chose to be a citizen. In that single act, he demonstrated to the world that republics could not only be born, but also survive. John Quincy Adams, the conscience of a revolution. In the bustling streets of Boston, where cobblestones echoed with the footsteps of merchants and the whispers of rebellion, lived a man whose weapon was not the sword, but the word. John Adams, short in stature but towering in intellect, believed that ideas could move mountains and that justice was worth any personal cost. When British soldiers fired into a crowd of colonists, killing 5 in what became known as the Boston Massacre, Adams faced a choice that would define his character. The entire city wanted blood, but Adams saw something more profound: the principle that even the guilty deserve a fair trial. He defended those soldiers, knowing it would cost him friends and reputation, because he believed that a nation founded on mob justice would never be free. It was the pattern of Adams' life. Choosing principle over popularity, truth over comfort. He was the engine of independence, the voice that pushed his reluctant colleagues toward the bold declaration that would change the world. While others wavered, Adams burned with the certainty that liberty was not just a dream, but a destiny. His presidency would be marked by the same unwavering commitment to conscience over convenience. When war with France loomed and his party demanded blood, Adams chose peace. It cost him re-election, but he believed that history would vindicate him. He was right. Thomas Jefferson, the architect of dreams. In the rolling hills of Virginia, where morning mist clung to ancient oaks and the Rivanna River whispered secrets to the dawn, stood a man whose mind contained multitudes. Thomas Jefferson was not merely a politician or a president. Still, a Renaissance soul trapped in a revolutionary age, a man who could design a building, play the violin, and write words that would echo through eternity. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. With these words, penned in a rented room in Philadelphia, Jefferson didn't just draft a Declaration of Independence, he crafted a promise to the future. He gave voice to humanity's deepest longing, the desire for freedom. But Jefferson was a man of contradictions, beautiful and terrible in their complexity. He wrote of equality while enslaving people who dreamed of democracy while living in a world of bondage. His legacy reminds us that even our most outstanding leaders are imperfect, and that progress comes not from perfect people, but from perfect ideals pursued by flawed human beings. The Louisiana Purchase doubled the nation's size, but Jefferson's true expansion was of the American imagination. He believed that knowledge was the foundation of liberty, that education was the guardian of democracy, and that the American experiment was not just about governing a nation, but about proving that people could govern themselves. James Madison, the quiet genius. In the libraries and study halls of early America, where candlelight flickered over ancient texts and modern dreams, sat a small, quiet man whose thoughts would become the architecture of a nation. James Madison was not built for the battlefield or the podium, but for the far more demanding arena of ideas. Madison understood something that eluded many of his contemporaries: that the greatest enemy of freedom is not tyranny from above, but chaos from below. He saw that democracy without structure is mob rule, that liberty without the law is license, and that the challenge was not just to throw off the chains of monarchy, but to build something better in its place. The Constitution he crafted was not just a document, but a machine designed to transform human ambition into the public good. Through checks and balances, separation of powers, and the careful division of authority, Madison created a system that would harness the energy of democracy while preventing its excesses. His Bill of Rights, those first 10 amendments that guarantee our most basic freedoms, was Madison's gift to the future. He understood that government power, even democratic power, must have limits, and that individual rights must be protected from the tyranny of the majority. James Monroe, the bridge between worlds, as the revolutionary generation began to fade. Passing their torch to new hands, James Monroe stood as a bridge between the world that was and the world that would be. He was the last president to have fought in the Revolution, the final link to the generation that had risked everything for an idea. Monroe's presidency was marked by what historians call the era of good feelings, a period when partisan divisions gave way to national unity and the wounds of war began to heal. America finally began to believe in its future. But Monroe's greatest gift to history was his understanding that America's security lay not in isolation, but in principled engagement with the world. The Monroe Doctrine declared that the Americas were no longer open to European colonization, that the Western Hemisphere belonged to its people, and that the United States would stand as a guardian of liberty in the Americas. It was a bold statement from a young nation, but Monroe understood that sometimes boldness is the only path to security. Andrew Jackson, the people's champion, from the rough frontier of Tennessee came a man who embodied the American spirit in all its contradictions. Andrew Jackson, Old Hickory, the president who proved that in America, anyone could rise to the highest office. Jackson was not born to privilege or educated in elite schools. He was forged in the fires of the frontier, shaped by loss and hardship, and tempered by the belief that ordinary people deserved an uncommon voice in their government. Jackson's presidency was a storm that reshaped the American political landscape. He fought the Bank of the United States, which he saw as a corrupt tool of the wealthy elite. He expanded the right to vote, bringing democracy to the ordinary person. He faced South Carolina when it tried to nullify federal law, proving that the Union was not just a compact between states, but a nation indivisible. But Jackson's legacy is also marked by darkness. His Indian Removal Act led to the Trail of Tears, one of the most tragic chapters in American history. He was a man of his time, shaped by its prejudices and blind spots, reminding us that even champions of democracy can be complicit in injustice. Martin Van Buren, the master of politics. In the back rooms of Albany, where deals were made and alliances forged, Martin Van Buren learned the art of politics as a craftsman learns his trade. The little magician understood that in a democracy, the art of the possible often matters more than the pursuit of the perfect, and that sometimes the most excellent service a leader can provide is to make the system work. Van Buren created the first truly national political party, the Democratic Party, and in doing so, he established the template for modern American politics. He understood that in a nation as large and diverse as America, unity could only come through an organization where democracy required not just votes, but systems to channel and count those votes. His presidency was marked by economic crisis, but Van Buren's response, refusing to use federal power to interfere with the natural cycles of the economy, established a precedent that would influence American economic policy for generations. He believed that the government's role was not to guarantee prosperity, but to ensure that the system remained fair and open to all. William Henry Harrison, the brief flame. Sometimes, history's greatest lessons come from its shortest chapters. William Henry Harrison, the hero of Tippecanoe, came to the presidency at age 68, determined to prove that age had not diminished his vigor. He delivered the longest inaugural address in American history on a cold, wet March day, refusing to wear a coat or hat, determined to show that he was still the rugged frontiersman who had won fame in the Indian Wars. 31 days later, he was dead, a victim of pneumonia that may have been caused by his determination to appear strong. His death shocked the nation and raised questions that the Constitution had not answered. What happens when a president dies? Is the vice president merely acting president? Or does he become president in his own right? John Tyler, Harrison's successor, answered those questions with characteristic determination. He insisted that he was not acting president, but president, period. He took the oath of office, moved into the White House, and established the precedent that has governed presidential succession ever since. Sometimes, the most important legacies are the ones we never see coming. John Tyler, the president without a party. John Tyler faced a unique challenge in American history. He was the first president without a party affiliation. Elected as a Whig, he broke with his party almost immediately, vetoing their key legislation and earning their eternal enmity. They expelled him from the party, making him a political orphan. But Tyler pressed on, governing according to his principles rather than his party's demands. Tyler's most outstanding achievement was the annexation of Texas, a move that sparked controversy, but fulfilled America's manifest destiny to expand from coast to coast. He understood that sometimes leadership requires taking unpopular positions, that the president serves not just his party, but the nation, and that principle must sometimes triumph over politics. His personal life was equally unconventional. He became the first president to marry while in office, marrying Julia Gardner, a woman 30 years his junior. Together, they had 7 children, bringing the total to 8, which he already had with his first wife. Tyler fathered more children than any other president, a testament to his belief in the future and his determination to leave something lasting behind. James K. Polk, the dark horse, who delivered. In 1844, the Democratic Convention was deadlocked. The leading candidates had fought each other to a standstill, and the party needed a compromise candidate. James K. Polk was not famous, not particularly charismatic, and not the obvious choice. But he was the right choice. A man who understood that sometimes the most significant strength is the ability to get things done. Polk came to the presidency with a clear agenda. Reduce tariffs, establish an independent treasury, settle the Oregon boundary dispute, and acquire California. He promised to serve only 1 term, but to accomplish more in 4 years than most presidents accomplish in 8. He kept his promise. In 4 years, Polk added more territory to the United States than any president except Jefferson. He settled the Oregon dispute peacefully, fought and won the Mexican-American War, and acquired California and the Southwest. He worked himself to exhaustion, quite literally. He died just 3 months after leaving office, worn out by his devotion to duty. Polk proved that in America, you don't have to be the most famous or the most charismatic to be great. You have to be determined, principled, and willing to work harder than anyone else. Sometimes, the most outstanding leaders are the ones who do their job so well that we barely notice they're doing it. Zachary Taylor, the soldier's president. From the dusty battlefields of Mexico came a president who had never voted in a presidential election, who wasn't sure which party he belonged to, but who understood that sometimes the most important qualification for leadership is the ability to do what's right, regardless of the consequences. Zachary Taylor, known as Old Rough and Ready, was a career soldier who had dedicated his life to serving his country. He enslaved people but opposed the expansion of slavery. He was a Southerner, but a Unionist. He proved that in America, principles matter more than pedigree, and that leadership is not about having all the answers, but about having the courage to stand up for what you believe. Taylor's presidency was cut short by his sudden death in 1850, but his legacy lives on in his unwavering commitment to the Union. He was prepared to use military force to prevent secession and preserve the nation that he had spent his life defending. His death may have postponed the Civil War, but it could not prevent it from happening. Millard Fillmore, the compromise president. Millard Fillmore came to the presidency at one of the most dangerous moments in American history. The nation was splitting apart over slavery, and Congress was deadlocked. Fillmore faced a choice: stand on principle and watch the Union dissolve, or compromise and hope that time would heal the wounds. He chose compromise, signing the Compromise of 1850, which included the Fugitive Slave Act. It was a decision that probably saved the Union in the short term, but may have made the Civil War inevitable in the long term. Fillmore understood that sometimes leaders must make choices that history will judge harshly, but that, at the moment, seems like the only way forward. Fillmore's legacy is complex. He was a man of principle who compromised his principles, a leader who chose unity over justice, and a president who postponed a crisis rather than solving it. But perhaps that was enough. Perhaps, at times, the most excellent service a leader can provide is to buy time, keeping the nation together long enough for better solutions to emerge. Franklin Pierce, The Handsome Tragedy. Franklin Pierce came to the presidency as a dark horse candidate, a compromise choice who seemed to offer healing to a divided nation. He was handsome, charming, and untainted by the partisan battles that had consumed Washington. But Pierce's presidency was marked by personal tragedy and political failure. Just weeks before his inauguration, Pierce and his wife watched their young son die in a train accident. The tragedy cast a shadow over his presidency, and Pierce never fully recovered from the loss. His wife believed that God had taken their son to punish them for Pierce's political ambitions, and she withdrew from public life. Pierce's presidency was marked by the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which opened the territories to slavery and led to Bleeding Kansas, a preview of the Civil War to come. Pierce believed that compromise could solve the slavery question, but he learned that some problems cannot be compromised. Sometimes, the most significant tragedies are not the ones that befall us personally, but the ones we allow to happen on our watch. James Buchanan. The bachelor president, James Buchanan, was the only president who never married, a fact that set him apart in an era when marriage was considered essential for political success. He was a lifelong bachelor, devoted to his career and his country, but perhaps lacking the personal connections that might have given him the insight to navigate the crisis that consumed his presidency. Buchanan came to office believing that the presidency was a limited institution, that the Constitution constrained presidential power, and that the proper role of government was to let events take their course. But the crisis of the Union required action, not patience, leadership, not legal precedent. As Southern states seceded after Lincoln's election, Buchanan declared secession illegal, but claimed that the federal government had no power to prevent it. He left office with the Union in tatters, passing the crisis to his successor. Buchanan's failure was not malice, but paralysis. Not evil, but inadequacy. Sometimes, the most significant tragedies are caused not by evil men, but by good men who fail to act when action is required. Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator. And then came Lincoln, the rail splitter from Illinois, the prairie lawyer who would save the Union and free the enslaved people. Lincoln understood that sometimes the most fantastic service a leader can provide is to help the nation live up to its highest ideals, even when the cost is terrible. Lincoln came to office as the nation was falling apart, and he faced a choice that would define not just his presidency, but the future of America. Let the Union dissolve or fight to preserve it. He chose to fight, knowing that the cost would be measured in blood and treasure, but believing that the Union was worth any price. The Emancipation Proclamation transformed the war from a fight to preserve the Union into a crusade for human freedom. It was a bold stroke that risked everything, but Lincoln understood that sometimes the most significant risks are the ones we must take to remain true to our principles. At Gettysburg, Lincoln redefined the American experiment in just 272 words. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. These words captured the essence of democracy and gave meaning to the sacrifice of those who died to preserve it. Lincoln's assassination robbed the nation of the leader it needed most in the aftermath of the war. But his legacy lives on in the Union he preserved and the freedom he proclaimed. He proved that America could be reborn, that the nation could emerge from its most significant crisis stronger and more just than it had been before. Ulysses S. Grant, the quiet hero from the muddy streets of Galena, Illinois, where failure seemed to follow him like a shadow, rose a man who would save the Union through sheer determination and quiet courage. Ulysses S. Grant was not born for greatness. was forged by it, hammered on the anvil of war into the leader America desperately needed. Grant understood something that eluded many of his contemporaries: that victory belongs not to the brilliant or the bold, but to those who refuse to quit. While other generals hesitated and calculated, Grant moved forward. When others retreated after setbacks, Grant advanced. His philosophy was simple: find out where the enemy is, attack them as soon as possible, and keep moving forward. At Vicksburg, he split the Confederacy in two. In the wilderness, he absorbed terrible losses, but kept pushing south. At Appomattox, he accepted Lee's surrender with the grace of a victor who understood that his former enemies would soon be his fellow citizens again. "The war is over," he told his celebrating soldiers. "The rebels are our countrymen again." As president, Grant faced the monumental task of reconstructing a shattered nation. He supported civil rights for formerly enslaved people, crushed the Ku Klux Klan, and tried to heal the wounds of war with justice tempered by mercy. His presidency was marked by scandal, but never by personal corruption. Grant's tragedy was that he trusted too easily and believed too readily in the goodness of others, and he paid the price for his generous heart. In his final years, facing bankruptcy and throat cancer, Grant wrote his memoirs in a race against time and death. He finished them just days before he died, ensuring that his family would be provided for and that history would remember not just the general who won the war, but the man who never stopped fighting for what was right. Andrew Johnson, the tailor's son. When Abraham Lincoln fell to an assassin's bullet, the presidency passed to a man who seemed uniquely unsuited for the moment. Andrew Johnson, the tailor's son from Tennessee, who had risen from poverty through sheer determination and stubborn pride. Johnson was a Democrat in a Republican administration, a Southerner who had remained loyal to the Union, and a man of the people who found himself at odds with the very people he claimed to serve. Johnson's tragedy was not malice, but blindness, an inability to see that the war had changed everything, that the old ways were dead, and that the nation needed to be reborn, not merely restored. He fought Congress at every turn, vetoing civil rights legislation and opposing efforts to protect the formerly enslaved people. His obstinacy led to his impeachment, the first president to face such humiliation. Yet Johnson's story reminds us that even failed presidents can embody American ideals. He rose from nothing, educated himself, and climbed to the highest office in the land. His failure was not in his origins, but in his vision. He could see the America that was, but not the America that needed to be. Rutherford B. Hayes, the gentleman president. The election of 1876 was decided not by the people, but by a backroom deal that traded the presidency for the end of Reconstruction. Rutherford B. Hayes became president under a cloud, dubbed his fraudulency by his critics. But he governed with such integrity that even his enemies came to respect him. Hayes understood that sometimes the most excellent service a leader can provide is to restore faith in the institutions of government. He reformed the civil service, fought corruption, and treated the presidency as a public trust rather than a personal prize. He promised to serve only one term and kept that promise, proving that in America, power is temporary and honor is eternal. Hayes's decision to end Reconstruction abandoned the formerly enslaved people to the mercies of their former masters, a tragedy that would haunt the nation for generations. But his commitment to reform and his integrity helped restore dignity to an office that had been tarnished by scandal and controversy. As he walked away from power in 1881, Hayes could look back on a presidency that, while imperfect, had helped heal some of the wounds of war and corruption. He spent his remaining years promoting education and civil rights, demonstrating that sometimes the most essential service comes not from holding office, but from using the influence that office provides to serve others. These first 19 presidents, from Washington's reluctant leadership to Hayes's quiet dignity, established the traditions and precedents that would guide the nation through its greatest trials. They were not perfect men, but they were necessary men, each contributing something essential to the American experiment. Some were visionaries who could see beyond the horizon of their times. Others were practical men who focused on the problems immediately before them. Some expanded the nation's boundaries, and others expanded their ideals. Some succeeded brilliantly, others failed tragically. But all of them understood that in America, leadership is not a privilege, but a responsibility, not a reward, but a burden willingly carried for the sake of generations yet unborn. As you close your eyes and let sleep wash over you, remember that these men, flawed, human, and mortal, dared to believe that government could serve the people rather than rule them, that power could be transferred peacefully, and that a nation conceived in liberty could long endure. Their struggles became our inheritance, their failures our lessons, their successes our foundation. In their stories, we find not just the history of America, but the ongoing story of humanity's quest for freedom, justice, and the courage to keep building a more perfect union. Sleep peacefully, knowing that their watch has come to an end. Still, their legacy lives on in every citizen who believes that democracy is not just a system of government, but a sacred trust passed from one generation to the next. Sweet dreams, and may the dreams of these founding leaders inspire your hopes for tomorrow.